John Harper wasn't your typical millionaire. Though his wealth had brought him luxuries beyond imagination, it hadn't brought him happiness. At 32, John owned a chain of high-end restaurants spread across the country, but the hustle of running an empire left him with little time for personal connections. His sprawling estate felt empty, a hollow shell of grandeur. Deep down, he knew he was searching for something, or someone, to give his life meaning. One brisk autumn morning, John visited Haven of Hope, a local shelter he had supported for years. He had written checks and attended charity galas, but he had never stepped through its doors until today. Something about this morning, the sharpness of the air, the golden leaves swirling on the pavement, had drawn him in. As he entered the shelter, he was greeted by the warm smile of Mrs. Carter, the shelter's coordinator. She had a way of putting anyone at ease, and her passion for helping children was infectious. "Mr. Harper," she said, shaking his hand, "we're thrilled to have you here. Let me show you around." John followed her through the brightly painted halls, passing rooms filled with children of all ages. Laughter echoed faintly, mingling with the scent of fresh-baked cookies coming from the kitchen. As they turned a corner, John's eyes fell on a small figure sitting by the window, sketching intently in a notebook. "That's Mia," Mrs. Carter whispered. "She's 8. She's been with us for a year now." John was drawn to the girl's quiet concentration. Her hair, a cascade of auburn curls, framed a face that looked far too serious for her age. He approached cautiously, not wanting to startle her. "Hi there," he said softly. "What are you drawing?" Mia glanced up, her green eyes wary but curious. She hesitated before turning the notebook to show him. It was a sketch of a house, simple yet full of detail, flowers in the garden, a swing on the porch. It was the kind of house that spoke of warmth and belonging. "It's beautiful," John said sincerely. "Is this your dream house?" Mia nodded, clutching the notebook protectively. "It's where I'd live if I had a family." The words hit John like a punch to the gut. He crouched to her level, searching for the right thing to say. "Families come in all shapes and sizes, you know? Sometimes they find us when we least expect them." Mia studied him for a moment, as if trying to decide whether he was worth her trust. Finally, she smiled, a small, hesitant smile, but a smile nonetheless. Mrs. Carter approached, her voice gentle. "Mia's been through a lot, Mr. Harper, but she's one of the brightest souls here. She just needs someone to believe in her." John straightened, his heart heavy yet hopeful. He couldn't explain it, but something about Mia tugged at him in a way nothing had before. He'd come to the shelter to give back, but now he realized he'd found a chance to truly change a life. "I'd like to help her," he said, his voice firm. "I'd like to give her a home." Mrs. Carter's eyes widened, a mixture of surprise and relief. "That's a big commitment, Mr. Harper. Are you sure?" John looked back at Mia, who had returned to her sketching but kept sneaking glances at him. For the first time in years, he felt certain about something. "Yes, I'm sure." The process of bringing Mia into John's life moved quickly, thanks to his resources and Mrs. Carter's assistance. Within a week, the paperwork was finalized, and Mia was riding in the back seat of John's sleek black car, clutching a small backpack that contained all her worldly possessions. She gazed out the window, wide-eyed, as the car wove through the city streets and into the sprawling suburbs. When they turned down a quiet lane lined with grand estates, her jaw dropped slightly. "This is where you live?" she asked, her voice tinged with awe. John chuckled. "That's right. I'll show you around as soon as we get there. I think you're going to like it." As the car pulled into the long driveway, the house came into view, a magnificent stone mansion surrounded by perfectly manicured gardens. The fountains sparkled in the sunlight, and a winding path led to the front door. Mia's grip on her backpack tightened. John noticed her hesitation. "It's big, I know," he said gently, "but it's just a house. What makes it special is the people in it. And now, that includes you." Mia's face softened, and she nodded. "Okay." When they stepped inside, Mia's eyes darted around, taking in the high ceilings, the grand staircase, and the gleaming hardwood floors. It was a world away from the crowded, cheerful chaos of the shelter. John gave her a tour, pointing out the library, the game room, and the kitchen. where the staff had prepared a welcome meal. Finally, they reached her room. John opened the door with a flourish, revealing a cozy, inviting space decorated in soft pastel colors. There was a bed with a fluffy duvet, shelves filled with books, and a desk stocked with art supplies. On the nightstand, a small lamp cast a warm glow. "This is your space," John said. "You can decorate it however you like. If there's anything you want or need, just let me know." Mia hesitated at the doorway, her gaze sweeping over the room. Slowly, she stepped inside and set her backpack on the bed. Her fingers brushed against the art supplies, and for the first time that day, she smiled. "It's nice," she murmured. "I'm glad you like it," John replied. "Take your time settling in. I'll be downstairs if you need anything." Mia nodded, and John left her to explore. As he walked back to the living room, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was the beginning of something extraordinary. Mia was quiet and guarded, but he could see glimpses of her resilience and curiosity. He was determined to give her the stability and care she deserved. Later that evening, John found Mia sitting in the library, flipping through a book. She looked up as he entered, and for a moment, there was a flicker of uncertainty in her expression. "Do you like to read?" he asked, taking a seat nearby. Mia nodded. "At the shelter, there was this one book I read over and over. It was about a girl who gets adopted by a family and has all kinds of adventures." John smiled. "Well, you can read as many books as you want here. This library is yours too." Mia tilted her head, as if trying to process the idea. "You're not like I thought you'd be." "Oh?" John asked, raising an eyebrow. "What did you think I'd be like?" She shrugged, looking down at the book. "I don't know. Rich people. They don't usually care about kids like me." Her words stung, but John kept his tone light. "Well, I hope I can prove you wrong." Mia glanced up at him, and for the first time, her eyes held a hint of trust. Maybe. Over the next few days, Mia began to adjust to her new life. She explored the house, growing more comfortable with her surroundings. She was particularly drawn to the garden, where she spent hours sketching flowers and trees in a notebook John had given her. John, for his part, made an effort to be present despite his busy schedule. He joined her for breakfast, asked about her drawings, and shared stories from his own childhood. Slowly but surely, the walls Mia had built around herself began to crack. One evening, as they sat in the living room, Mia surprised John by showing him one of her sketches. It was a drawing of the house, complete with the garden and fountains. "You're really talented," John said, genuinely impressed. "Have you ever thought about being an artist when you grow up?" Mia shrugged. "I don't know. I never really thought about growing up before." The comment was casual, but it hit John like a punch to the gut. He realized how deeply her past experiences had shaped her, and how much she needed not just a house, but a home. A place where she could dream and feel safe. "You can be anything you want, Mia," he said firmly, "and I'll be here to help you every step of the way." She looked at him, her green eyes filled with a mix of hope and uncertainty. "You really mean that?" "I do," John replied. "No matter what." For the first time, Mia's smile reached her eyes. "Thanks, John." In the following weeks, Mia's initial shyness began to fade. The once quiet girl now laughed softly at John's attempts to joke with her during breakfast and even teased him when he burned the toast one morning. Though she was still cautious, her guarded demeanor started to thaw. John, in turn, found himself looking forward to moments with Mia. He often caught himself wondering how such a small person could bring so much light into his massive, lonely home. Despite his busy workdays, he made sure to prioritize her, carving out time each evening to ask about her day or to read her a bedtime story. It became their ritual. One Saturday morning, John decided to show Mia the attic. "I've been meaning to clean this out for years," he explained as they climbed the creaky stairs. "Figured you might want to help me. There's no telling what we'll find." Mia's eyes lit up with curiosity. The attic was a treasure trove of forgotten items. Dusty boxes, old furniture, and piles of books. John lifted the lid of one box, revealing photo albums and framed pictures. "Who's this?" Mia asked, pointing to a photo of a young boy standing between a man and a woman. The boy had John's piercing blue eyes and mischievous grin. "That's me," John said, his voice tinged with nostalgia. "And those are my parents. This was taken at our old cabin in the mountains. My dad loved fishing, and my mom always packed way too many snacks." Mia studied the photo intently. "You look happy." "I was," John admitted. "They were great parents. I miss them every day." "What happened to them?" she asked, her voice soft. John hesitated. "They passed away when I was about your age." "A car accident?" Mia's eyes widened. "That's really sad." John nodded. "It was. But I had my aunt and uncle to take care of me. They made sure I felt loved and safe. That's what family does. They look out for each other, no matter what." Mia was quiet for a moment, then reached out to take the photo. "Can I keep this? Just for a little while?" John was surprised but nodded. "Of course." That evening, after dinner, Mia returned to the attic by herself. She brought her sketchbook and carefully drew the photo she had taken, replicating every detail: the boy's grin, the parents' warm smiles, the background of trees and mountains. She worked in silence, her pencil moving steadily across the page. The next morning, she presented the drawing to John. "I made this for you," she said, her voice almost shy. John took the sketch and stared at it, his throat tightening. It was beautifully done, capturing not just the physical likeness, but also the emotion of the memory. "Mia, this is incredible. Thank you." She shrugged, but her cheeks turned pink. "I just thought, maybe it would make you happy." "It does," John said, his voice thick with emotion. "It really does." One afternoon, John decided to take Mia to the park. It was a bright, sunny day, perfect for being outdoors. They brought a picnic and a kite, and Mia spent the afternoon running through the grass, laughing as the kite soared higher and higher into the sky. As they sat together on a blanket, Mia turned to John. "This is the best day I've ever had." John smiled, his heart swelling. "I'm glad. You deserve a lot of good days, Mia, and we're just getting started." That evening, as John tucked Mia into bed, she hesitated before speaking. "John, do you think I'll ever feel like I really belong here?" Her question caught him off guard, and he sat down beside her. "What makes you feel like you don't belong?" She looked down at her hands. "It's just, this house is so big, and you're so important. I'm just a kid from a shelter. What if you change your mind?" John felt a pang in his chest. He reached out and gently tilted her chin so she would look at him. "Mia, listen to me. You belong here because this is your home now. I'm not going to change my mind about that. You're part of my family, and nothing's going to change that." Her eyes glistened with unshed tears. "Promise?" "I promise," John said firmly. "You're stuck with me, kid." She giggled through her tears, and John felt a sense of relief. "Okay," she whispered. "Good night, John." "Good night, Mia," he said, brushing a strand of hair from her face before turning off the light. That night, as John lay in bed, he couldn't stop thinking about Mia's question. It broke his heart to know she still doubted her place in his life. He resolved to do whatever it took to show her that she was wanted, cherished, and loved. The next morning, he made a plan. It was time for Mia to see just how serious he was about giving her a sense of belonging. The next morning, Mia awoke to the sound of soft humming coming from the kitchen. She rubbed her eyes and followed the sound, finding John standing at the counter, flipping pancakes. "Morning, sleepyhead," he said with a grin. "I thought we'd have a big breakfast today. Pancakes okay with you?" Mia nodded, sliding onto a stool at the kitchen island. "You're making them yourself?" John laughed. "What, you don't think I can cook?" She gave him a skeptical look. "You burned the toast last time." He held up a spatula in mock offense. "Touché. But pancakes are my specialty. My mom taught me when I was your age." Mia tilted her head. "You talk about your mom a lot. You must have really loved her." John's smile softened. "I did. She was incredible. She made everything feel like an adventure. Even the smallest things, like making pancakes or going to the park." Mia hesitated before asking, "Do you miss her?" "Every day," John admitted. "But I like to think that everything she taught me is still with me. And now, I get to pass some of that on to you." Mia's cheeks flushed, and she quickly looked down at her plate as John set a stack of golden pancakes in front of her. "Thanks," she mumbled, her voice barely audible. Later that afternoon, as they sat in the garden enjoying the crisp autumn air, Mia asked more about John's childhood. It wasn't something he often talked about, but with Mia, it felt natural to share. "I grew up in a small house," John began. "It wasn't fancy like this one, but it was full of love. My dad was a high school teacher, and my mom worked at the library. We didn't have a lot of money, but they always made me feel like I had everything I needed." Mia listened intently, her sketchbook resting forgotten in her lap. "What happened to them?" she asked, her voice hesitant. John took a deep breath. "They died in a car accident when I was 10. It was sudden. One moment they were there, and the next they were gone." Mia's eyes widened, and her hands gripped the edges of her chair. "That's awful." "It was," John said quietly, "but I was lucky. My aunt and uncle took me in, and they made sure I always felt loved. It wasn't the same, but it was enough to keep me going." Mia's gaze dropped to the ground. "I didn't have anyone like that." John's heart ached at her words. He reached over and gently took her hand. "You have someone now, Mia, and I'm not going anywhere." She looked up at him, her green eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "Promise?" "I promise," he said firmly. "You're stuck with me, kid." That evening, John decided it was time to introduce Mia to a part of his past he had kept tucked away. He led her to a room she hadn't seen before, at the end of a long hallway. Inside was a cozy space filled with framed photographs, mementos, and keepsakes from his childhood. "This is my memory room," John explained. "Whenever I miss my parents or need to feel close to them, I come here." Mia wandered around the room, her fingers brushing lightly over the frames and trinkets. She stopped in front of a photo of a young John sitting on his father's shoulders, both of them grinning ear to ear. "You look happy," she said softly. "I was," John replied. "That was one of the best summers of my life. We spent every weekend fishing at the lake." Mia glanced at him. "You kept all of this for so long. Why?" "Because it reminds me of where I came from," John said. "And it helps me remember how lucky I was to have their love." Mia thought about this for a moment before turning back to the photo. "I don't have anything like this. No photos, no stuff from when I was little." John's chest tightened at the sadness in her voice. "Then we'll make new memories," he said. "We'll take photos, collect keepsakes, and fill a room just like this one with all the things that matter to you." Her lips parted in surprise, but she quickly closed them, nodding silently. The next day, John handed Mia a gift, a small, vintage Polaroid camera. "This is for you," he said, "so we can start capturing our memories together." Mia's face lit up as she turned the camera over in her hands. "Really? I can keep it?" "Of course," John said with a smile. "Now, let's take our first picture." They set the timer and posed together in the garden, with the colorful autumn leaves as their backdrop. The camera whirred, and moments later, a photo slid out. Mia held it up, watching as the image slowly appeared. A snapshot of the two of them, smiling side by side. "It's perfect," she whispered. John framed the photo and hung it in the memory room that evening. As he placed it among the other mementos, he realized how much his life had changed since Mia arrived. The once lonely mansion was now filled with laughter, warmth, and the beginnings of a new family. As Mia fell asleep that night, clutching the Polaroid camera close to her chest, John stood outside her door, his heart full. For the first time in years, he felt a sense of purpose, a belief that he was building something truly meaningful. And in the quiet stillness of the night, he made a vow to himself, to give Mia a life filled with the love and belonging she had always dreamed of. The morning sun streamed through the grand windows, painting the marble floors with a golden glow. Mia sat at the kitchen table, her Polaroid camera in hand, carefully examining the photos she had taken over the past week. They were simple snapshots, flowers in the garden, the old oak tree in the backyard, and even a blurry picture of John trying to fix the kitchen sink. Each one carried a story, a small moment she was starting to treasure. John walked in, dressed sharply in a navy suit. "Good morning, Mia," he said with a warm smile, grabbing a cup of coffee. "What's on the agenda for today?" She looked up, her eyes lighting up as she showed him the stack of photos. "Just adding to my collection." John chuckled. "Looks like you're building quite the portfolio." "I'm documenting my new life," she said matter-of-factly, flipping through the images. "It's like I'm making my own history." "That's a great way to look at it," John said, proud of her growing confidence. "I'll be back this afternoon. If you need anything, Mrs. Thompson is here." Mia nodded, though her smile dimmed slightly. John noticed but didn't press her. He had to get to the office, and he knew Mia needed time to adjust to the rhythm of their new life. After John left, Mia wandered the house, her camera slung over her shoulder. Mrs. Thompson, the housekeeper, greeted her with a kind smile. "Good morning, dear. Would you like to help me bake some cookies?" Mia hesitated. "Maybe later," she said, her voice distant. The truth was, Mia felt a little lost without John around. The house, as beautiful as it was, still felt too big and too quiet. She missed the shelter's bustling noise, the constant hum of people moving around. Here, it was different, peaceful, but also lonely when John wasn't home. She decided to explore, determined to find something interesting to photograph. As she wandered through the hallways, her steps took her to a door she hadn't noticed before. It was slightly ajar, revealing a room filled with tall bookshelves and a desk cluttered with papers. It didn't look like the tidy spaces she'd seen so far. Curious, Mia pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room smelled faintly of old wood and ink, and sunlight streamed through the tall windows, illuminating the dust motes in the air. On the desk, she noticed a leather-bound journal. The initials JH were embossed on the cover. Mia knew she shouldn't touch it, but her curiosity got the better of her. She flipped open the journal and found handwritten entries, each one detailing moments from John's life, his thoughts, his dreams, and even his struggles. One page caught her attention. It was dated just a few months ago. "Sometimes I wonder if this house will ever feel like a home. It's strange how you can have everything but still feel like something's missing. Maybe I've been looking in the wrong places. Maybe it's not about things but people." Mia's heart ached as she read the words. She hadn't realized how lonely John had been before she came into his life. It made her feel closer to him, knowing they had both been searching for something, or someone, to fill the emptiness. She carefully closed the journal and left the room, her mind swirling with thoughts. When John returned that afternoon, he found Mia sitting in the garden, her camera resting on her lap. She looked up as he approached, and her face broke into a smile. "Welcome back," she said. "Thanks," John replied, sitting beside her. "How was your day?" "Quiet," Mia admitted. She hesitated before adding, "I found your journal." John blinked in surprise. "My journal?" She nodded, her gaze dropping to her hands. "I didn't mean to snoop. I saw it and I was curious." John let out a small laugh, shaking his head. "Well, I suppose if anyone has a right to read it, it's you." Mia looked up, her green eyes earnest. "You wrote that you felt like something was missing. Do you still feel that way?" John paused, considering her question. "No," he said finally. "I don't feel that way anymore." "You've changed that." Mia's cheeks flushed, and she ducked her head to hide her smile. "I was thinking, maybe we could make a journal together. You know, write about all the things we do and the memories we make." John's heart swelled at the suggestion. "I'd like that, Mia. A lot." That evening, they started their joint journal. John wrote the first entry. "Today, Mia and I started something special. She reminded me that it's not the house or the things in it that make a home. It's the people we share it with." Mia added her own thoughts below his. "I used to think I didn't belong anywhere, but now, I'm starting to feel like I do." John says we're a family, and I think he means it. As they closed the journal and placed it on the living room shelf, John looked at Mia and felt a deep sense of pride. She was no longer the shy, uncertain girl he had met at the shelter. She was becoming someone stronger, someone braver, and he was honored to be a part of her journey. "Good night, Mia," he said as he tucked her in later that night. "Good night, John," she replied, her voice filled with warmth. As John left her room, he realized that while they were still finding their way, they were doing it together. And that made all the difference. The days were beginning to feel fuller, richer. John noticed that Mia was laughing more, her once guarded expressions now replaced by moments of unfiltered joy. She had even started leaving her Polaroid photos around the house, tiny glimpses of her growing comfort in her new home. But despite the progress, there were still moments when John caught her staring out the window, her sketchbook clutched tightly to her chest, lost in thought. One crisp afternoon, John returned from work earlier than usual. The sun was just beginning to set, casting the house in a warm, golden light. As he walked through the front door, the familiar scent of freshly baked cookies greeted him, but the house was unusually quiet. "Mia?" he called, setting his briefcase on the table. No answer. He made his way through the house, eventually finding Mrs. Thompson in the kitchen. She was wiping her hands on a towel, her face alight with amusement. "She's upstairs in your office, Mr. Harper." "My office?" John asked, puzzled. Mrs. Thompson nodded. "She's been up there for a while. Said she wanted to surprise you." John smiled, curious, and climbed the stairs. His office door was slightly ajar, and as he pushed it open, he found Mia sitting cross-legged on the floor. Surrounding her were piles of papers, photo albums, and a few items he hadn't seen in years. His parents' old keepsakes. "Mia," John began, stepping inside. "What are you up to?" She looked up, her face glowing with excitement. "I found these in the attic," she said, holding up an old photo album. "Did you know you kept so many pictures of your family?" John chuckled, crouching down beside her. "I did. My mom was obsessed with documenting everything." Mia flipped open the album, revealing page after page of candid shots. Christmas mornings, family vacations, and quiet evenings by the fire. "They look so happy," she said softly. "They were," John replied, his voice tinged with nostalgia. "They made every moment feel special, even the little ones." Mia's gaze lingered on one photo in particular. It was of John as a boy, sitting on his father's lap, his mother leaning in with an adoring smile. "I think I'd like them," she said. John's throat tightened. "I think they'd like you too." As they sifted through the photos, Mia suddenly pulled out a sketch she had been working on. It was a drawing of John's family, his parents, himself as a boy, and even her, standing beside them. The detail was remarkable, but it was the sentiment behind the drawing that struck John the most. "Mia," he said, his voice thick, "this is incredible. You included yourself?" She nodded, her cheeks flushing. "I thought, maybe if they were still here, they'd want me to be part of the family too." John reached out, pulling her into a gentle hug. "Mia, you're already part of this family, and I have no doubt my parents would have loved you as much as I do." Her arms tightened around him, and for a moment, neither of them said a word. It was one of those quiet moments that didn't need words. One of those moments John's parents had always cherished. That evening, after Mia went to bed, John sat in his office, looking at the sketch she had made. It was remarkable how much she had come to mean to him in such a short time. She wasn't just filling the emptiness he had felt for years. She was creating something entirely new, something he hadn't realized he was capable of, a family. The next morning, John decided to show Mia a part of his past he rarely spoke about. "How about a little adventure today?" he asked over breakfast. Mia perked up, her eyes curious. "What kind of adventure?" "You'll see," John replied with a mysterious smile. They drove for over an hour, leaving the city behind and venturing into the countryside. Finally, they arrived at a small, weathered cabin surrounded by trees. Mia stepped out of the car, her eyes wide as she took in the scene. "This is where I grew up," John explained. "Well, where I spent my summers, anyway. My parents bought this cabin when I was little. It's not much, but it was home." Mia followed him inside, her camera slung over her shoulder. The cabin was cozy and filled with relics of John's childhood. Old fishing rods, a stack of dusty board games, and shelves lined with books. "Why don't you live here anymore?" Mia asked. John hesitated. "After my parents passed, it was too hard to come back. But now, I think it's time to make new memories here." Mia's face lit up. "We could come here together?" John smiled. "Absolutely." They spent the day exploring the area. Mia snapped photos of the lake, the tall pine trees, and the old dock where John had learned to fish. She even managed to capture a picture of John skipping rocks across the water, his face relaxed in a way she hadn't seen before. As the sun dipped below the horizon, they sat together on the dock, their feet dangling over the edge. "John," Mia said, breaking the silence, "do you think this place could feel like home again?" "I think it already does," he replied, ruffling her hair gently. Mia leaned against him, her head resting on his shoulder. "I think so too." That night, as they returned to the mansion, John placed the photo Mia had taken of the lake on the mantel in the living room. It was a small gesture, but it symbolized something far greater. The start of a new chapter, filled with the promise of love, family, and a future they would build together. The drive back from the cabin had left both John and Mia feeling closer than ever. Mia had fallen asleep in the car, her head resting against the window, her Polaroid camera tucked safely in her lap. John stole occasional glances at her as he drove, his heart swelling with a feeling he hadn't experienced in years, something deeper than happiness, something that felt like true contentment. When they returned home, the house felt warmer, as if the day's adventures had brought a new energy to its walls. After helping Mia to bed, John sat in the living room, staring at the photo she had taken of the cabin's lake. He realized how much she was teaching him, about finding joy in small moments, about looking forward instead of backward. The next morning, John was up early. He wanted to make Mia's favorite breakfast, pancakes with chocolate chips, but as he flipped the first batch, he heard her small footsteps padding into the kitchen. "Good morning, sleepyhead," he greeted her, turning to see her rubbing her eyes. "Morning," she replied, sliding onto a stool at the counter. She was quiet, more subdued than usual. "Everything okay?" John asked, setting a plate of pancakes in front of her. Mia hesitated, poking at her food with a fork. "I had a dream," she said finally, "about my mom." John paused, sensing the weight of her words. "Do you want to talk about it?" She shrugged, her eyes fixed on the plate. She was singing. "She always used to sing to me when I couldn't sleep. But then I woke up, and I couldn't remember the song." John sat down beside her. "It sounds like a nice memory." "It was," Mia said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I miss her, even though I don't remember her very well. Sometimes I think, maybe she'd be mad at me for being here. For being happy." John's chest tightened. "Mia, your mom would want you to be happy. She'd want you to have a place where you feel safe and loved." Mia looked up at him, her green eyes shimmering with uncertainty. "Do you really think so?" "I do," John said firmly, "and I think she'd be proud of you. You're strong and you're brave. That's not something everyone can say." A small smile tugged at Mia's lips. "You think I'm brave?" "I know you are," John replied. "It takes a lot of courage to open your heart, especially after everything you've been through." Mia nodded slowly, her expression thoughtful. "I think you're brave too." John raised an eyebrow, surprised. "Me?" "Yeah," Mia said, her voice gaining strength. "You didn't have to bring me here. You could have just kept living your life, but you didn't." "That's brave." John was taken aback by her words, but they touched something deep inside him. He reached out and ruffled her hair. "Well, I guess we're both pretty brave then." Later that day, John decided to surprise Mia with an outing. "We're going somewhere special," he announced as they got into the car. "Where?" she asked, her curiosity piqued. "You'll see," John replied with a teasing smile. They drove for nearly an hour before arriving at a local animal sanctuary. As they entered, the sounds of chirping birds and the soft rustle of leaves filled the air. Mia's face lit up as she saw the enclosures filled with rescued animals. Everything from turtles and rabbits to a small group of deer grazing peacefully in a shaded area. "This place is amazing," Mia said, her eyes wide with wonder. "I thought you might like it," John said. "It's a sanctuary for animals that need a second chance." Mia smiled at him. "Kind of like me?" John's heart swelled. "Exactly like you." As they walked through the sanctuary, Mia's excitement grew. She took pictures of the animals, her laughter ringing out as a curious goat nudged her hand for food. They spent hours exploring the grounds, and by the time they sat down for a picnic lunch, Mia was bubbling with energy. "I want to volunteer here someday," she said between bites of her sandwich. "I could help take care of the animals and make sure they feel safe." "I think that's a great idea," John said. "You'd be really good at it." Mia looked thoughtful. "I used to think I couldn't do anything, but now I feel like maybe I can." John reached across the picnic table and took her hand. Mia, you can do anything you set your mind to, and I'll be right here, cheering you on. She smiled at him, a genuine, radiant smile that made John feel like they were both exactly where they were meant to be. That evening, as they drove home, Mia was unusually quiet. John glanced at her in the rearview mirror. Penny for your thoughts? She looked up, her expression serious. John, do you ever think about what would have happened if we hadn't met? The question caught him off guard, but he answered honestly. All the time. And every time I do, I feel grateful that we did. Mia nodded, her gaze returning to the window. Me too. I think maybe you were what I needed all along. John felt a lump rise in his throat. And you're exactly what I needed, Mia. More than you know. That night, as John tucked Mia into bed, she surprised him by reaching out and hugging him tightly. Good night, John, she said, her voice filled with warmth. Good night, Mia, he replied, his arms wrapping around her small frame. Sleep well. As he left her room, John felt a deep sense of peace. They were still finding their way, but each day brought them closer together. And in those quiet, meaningful moments, he knew they were building something truly unshakable, a family. The next morning began like any other. Mia was in the garden, taking photos of the flowers that had bloomed overnight, while John reviewed some documents for work at the kitchen table. The tranquility of the moment was interrupted by the sharp chime of the doorbell. John glanced at the clock. It was unusual for anyone to visit so early. Opening the door, he was greeted by a woman in a tailored suit, holding a clipboard. Her expression was professional but kind. Mr. Harper? She asked. Yes, that's me, John replied. I'm Ms. Daniels from Child Protective Services, she said. I'm here for a follow-up visit regarding Mia. John's chest tightened. He had expected this eventually, but the timing caught him off guard. Of course, he said, stepping aside to let her in. Mia's in the garden. Would you like to meet her now? Ms. Daniels nodded. Yes, but I'd also like to speak with you first. They sat in the living room, where John explained how Mia had been adjusting to her new life. He spoke about her love for art, her growing confidence, and the routines they had built together. Ms. Daniels listened intently, occasionally jotting down notes. You seem very committed to her, Ms. Daniels said. That's wonderful to see. But I do need to ensure that everything is in her best interest. John's brow furrowed. Is there a problem? Ms. Daniels hesitated. Not necessarily. It's just standard procedure to confirm that Mia's placement is truly the best fit for her long-term development. The implication hit John like a cold wind. He had poured his heart into making Mia feel at home, but the idea that someone might question their bond unsettled him deeply. Mia is thriving here, he said firmly. She's happy, safe, and loved. Ms. Daniels offered a polite smile. I'll need to see that for myself. Let's talk with Mia. John led Ms. Daniels to the garden, where Mia was crouched beside a row of daisies, snapping photos. When she looked up and saw the stranger, her body tensed. Mia, John said gently, this is Ms. Daniels. She's here to talk to us about how you're doing. Mia straightened, clutching her camera tightly. Did I do something wrong? Not at all, Ms. Daniels said warmly. I'm just here to make sure everything is going well. Mia glanced at John, who gave her an encouraging nod. Slowly, she relaxed and allowed Ms. Daniels to sit with her on the garden bench. For the next half hour, Ms. Daniels asked Mia a series of questions. How she liked living with John, what her daily life was like, and how she felt about her new home. Mia answered cautiously at first, but as the conversation continued, she opened up. I like it here, Mia said, her voice steady. John makes me pancakes, and he reads to me at night. I get to take pictures and draw whenever I want. It's nice. Ms. Daniels smiled. That sounds lovely, Mia. And how do you feel about being part of John's family? Mia hesitated, her gaze dropping to the camera in her lap. I feel happy, like maybe I belong. The words were simple, but they carried immense weight. John, who had been listening from a distance, felt a lump rise in his throat. After Ms. Daniels left, John found Mia sitting quietly in the living room, flipping through her sketchbook. She looked up as he approached. Did I say the right things? She asked. her voice tinged with worry. "You were perfect," John assured her, sitting beside her. "You just needed to be honest, and you were—" Mia nodded, but didn't look entirely convinced. "What if she doesn't think I should stay here?" John's heart ached at the fear in her voice. He reached out, taking her hand in his. "Mia, no matter what, you're not alone. We'll face anything that comes our way together. I promise." Her lips trembled, and she leaned into him, resting her head against his side. "Okay," she whispered. The following days passed in a haze of uncertainty. Although Ms. Daniels had assured them she would only make her recommendations after a thorough review, John couldn't help but feel the weight of her visit hanging over them. He threw himself into ensuring Mia felt secure, planning outings and activities to keep her mind occupied. One afternoon, they decided to visit an art exhibit at a nearby museum. Mia's eyes lit up as she wandered through the galleries, taking in the vibrant paintings and sculptures. She stopped in front of a large canvas depicting a serene landscape. "It feels like a dream," she said, tilting her head. "Like you could step right into it." John smiled. "Art has a way of making us feel things we can't always put into words." Mia turned to him. "Do you think I could be an artist someday?" "I know you can," John said. "You've already got the talent and the heart." Her face brightened at his words, and for a moment, the shadow of doubt seemed to lift. That evening, back at the house, John found a letter waiting for him on the kitchen counter. His breath caught as he recognized the official seal of Child Protective Services. He tore it open, scanning the words quickly. Relief flooded him as he read Ms. Daniels' conclusion. Mia's placement with John was approved. The letter noted the bond they had formed and praised the stable, loving environment John had provided. "Mia," John called, his voice filled with excitement. She appeared in the doorway, her expression cautious. "What is it?" John held up the letter. "It's official. You're staying here." Her eyes widened, and for a moment, she didn't move. Then, with a sudden burst of energy, she ran to him, wrapping her arms around his waist. "Really?" she asked, her voice muffled against his chest. "Really?" John said, his arms tightening around her. "You're home, Mia, for good." She pulled back just enough to look up at him, her green eyes shining with tears. "I've never had a real home before." "You do now," John said softly, "and you always will." That night, as they added a new entry to their shared journal, Mia wrote, "Today, I found out I get to stay with John forever. I'm not scared anymore. I have a home, and I have him. I think my mom would be happy." John read her words and felt a deep, unshakable gratitude. They had faced their first real challenge as a family and come out stronger. Together, they were building something beautiful, something permanent. The following weeks passed like a gentle breeze, filled with moments that seemed to sparkle in their simplicity. John noticed how Mia's confidence was blossoming. She had begun leaving her sketchbook open on the coffee table, a silent invitation for him to admire her latest work. The Polaroid photos she had taken were now framed and displayed along the hallway, creating a gallery of memories that made the house feel alive. Still, John wanted to do something special for Mia, something that would show her how much she meant to him and how far she had come. The idea came to him one evening as he watched her sketch in the garden, her face lit with quiet focus. The next morning, John called Mrs. Thompson into the kitchen. "I need your help with a surprise for Mia," he said, spreading a blueprint across the counter. Mrs. Thompson peered at it, her brows arching. "Well, that's ambitious," she said with a chuckle. "But I think she'll love it." "She deserves it," John replied. "Let's make this happen." For the next week, while Mia was at school or preoccupied with her art, John worked tirelessly with a small team of contractors. He was careful to keep the project hidden, dodging Mia's curious questions and changing the subject whenever she asked about the occasional noise coming from the back of the house. On a bright Saturday morning, the surprise was finally ready. John led Mia out to the backyard, her eyes covered with a soft scarf. "Where are we going?" she asked, laughing nervously. "You'll see," John said, his voice tinged with excitement. "Just a few more steps." When they reached the spot, he gently removed the scarf. "Okay, open your eyes," Mia gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. Before her stood a small, charming building nestled at the edge of the garden. It had large windows, a cheerful blue door, and a wooden sign above the entrance that read, Mia's Studio. "It's yours," John said, his heart racing as he watched her reaction. "A place where you can draw, paint, take photos, whatever your heart desires." Mia stood frozen for a moment, her green eyes wide with disbelief. Then she ran to the studio, pushing the door open. Inside, the space was flooded with natural light. Shelves lined the walls, filled with art supplies, paints, brushes, sketch pads, and even a professional easel. A small desk with a Polaroid printer stood in the corner, ready for her to print her photos. Mia turned back to John, tears streaming down her face. "You did this for me?" John nodded, his own eyes misty. "I wanted you to have a space that's all yours. A place where you can dream and create, just like you've always wanted." Mia ran back to him, throwing her arms around his waist. "It's perfect. I don't even know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," John said, holding her tightly. "I'm just glad you're happy." The studio quickly became Mia's sanctuary. She spent hours inside, experimenting with paints and filling her sketchbooks with intricate drawings. Her first project was a mural on one of the walls, a colorful depiction of the garden, complete with the flowers she loved to photograph and the old oak tree where she liked to sit and sketch. John often peeked in to see her at work, marveling at her talent and the way her creativity seemed to flow so effortlessly. One evening, she called him into the studio with an excited smile. "Look," she said, pointing to the mural. "I added something." John stepped closer, his eyes widening. Among the flowers and trees, she had painted two figures, a man and a little girl standing hand in hand. Though their features were simple, there was no mistaking who they were. "That's us," Mia said, her voice soft. "Because this is our place now." John's throat tightened. He crouched beside her, resting a hand on her shoulder. "It's beautiful, Mia. Just like you." One afternoon, as they sat on the porch enjoying glasses of lemonade, Mia turned to John with a thoughtful expression. "Why did you do all this for me?" she asked. "The house, the studio, everything?" John set down his glass, his gaze steady. "Because you're my family, Mia. And family takes care of each other." Mia looked down, her fingers tracing the edge of her glass. "I've never had anyone who wanted to take care of me before." "Well," John said gently, "you have me now, and I'll always be here for you." Mia smiled, a small but genuine smile that lit up her face. "I think I finally believe you." That evening, they added a new entry to their shared journal. John wrote, "Today, Mia's studio became a reality. Seeing her happiness reminds me why this journey is worth everything. She's not just a part of my life. She's the best part." Mia wrote beneath his entry, "I used to think I didn't deserve nice things or a real family. But now, I know I do." John says I'm his family, and I think I'm starting to feel like it's true. As the days passed, the studio became more than just a place for Mia to create. It became a symbol of everything they had built together: trust, love, and a shared dream of a brighter future. Each time Mia painted or sketched, it was as if she was rewriting her story, one brushstroke at a time. And as John watched her thrive, he realized that she had given him something just as precious: a renewed sense of purpose and a heart fuller than he ever thought possible. The seasons began to change, and the crisp days of autumn gave way to the chill of winter. The house, once echoing with a quiet emptiness, now hummed with life. The walls were adorned with Mia's framed sketches, and laughter spilled from the kitchen and living room as she and John spent their evenings playing board games, baking cookies, and adding to their ever-growing journal of memories. As the first snowfall dusted the garden, Mia stood by the window with her Polaroid camera, snapping pictures of the pristine white landscape. She had never seen snow like this before. Not the thick, fluffy kind that blanketed the world and turned everything magical. "John," she called, her voice brimming with excitement. "It's so pretty." John appeared in the doorway, a steaming mug of cocoa in his hand. "It is," he agreed, setting the mug down and pulling on his coat. "Want to go outside?" Mia grinned, already reaching for her boots and scarf. They stepped out into the cold, the crunch of snow beneath their feet breaking the quiet stillness. Mia twirled, her arms outstretched, as the snowflakes fell around her. "Let's build a snowman," she exclaimed. John laughed. "You're on." Together, they rolled snow into large, lumpy spheres, stacking them on top of each other. Mia insisted on adding twigs for arms and stones for buttons, and by the time they were done, the snowman stood proudly in the center of the garden. "It's perfect," Mia declared, stepping back to admire their work. "It's a masterpiece," John agreed, his breath visible in the frosty air. Mia pulled out her camera and snapped a photo. She handed it to John as it developed. "This one's for you," she said. John smiled, slipping the photo into his pocket. "Thanks, kiddo." Later that evening, they sat by the fireplace, warming their hands and sipping cocoa. Mia's cheeks were still pink from the cold, and her eyes sparkled with the joy of the day. She leaned back against the couch, her sketchbook resting on her lap. "John," she said after a moment, "can I ask you something?" "Of course," he replied. "Do you ever think about what your parents would say if they could see you now?" John looked into the fire, the orange flames flickering in his eyes. "I do," he admitted. "I think they'd be proud. They always taught me that family isn't just about who you're born with, it's about who you choose to care for. I think they'd be happy I chose you." Mia's face softened. "I think so too." She hesitated, then added, "Do you think my mom would feel the same?" John turned to her, his expression serious but kind. "Mia, I know she would. She'd want you to be happy and loved. And I'm sure she'd be proud of the strong, kind, and talented person you're becoming." Mia's lips trembled, and she blinked back tears. "I hope so." John reached out and took her hand. "I know so." The days leading up to Christmas were a whirlwind of activity. It was Mia's first real holiday in a home, and John was determined to make it unforgettable. They decorated the house together, stringing lights along the banister and hanging ornaments on the towering Christmas tree. Mia's laughter rang out as John lifted her onto his shoulders to place the star at the top. On Christmas Eve, they curled up on the couch, watching a classic holiday movie. The room was warm and filled with the scent of pine and cinnamon. As the credits rolled, Mia turned to John. "I have something for you," she said, reaching for a small, carefully wrapped package under the tree. John raised an eyebrow. "You didn't have to get me anything." "It's not much," Mia said, her cheeks pink, "but I wanted to." John opened the package, revealing a framed sketch. It was of the two of them sitting together in the garden, their snowman standing proudly in the background. The detail was exquisite, capturing not just their likeness but the joy of the moment. "Mia," John said, his voice thick with emotion, "this is incredible." "Thank you." She smiled shyly. "I wanted you to have something to remember this Christmas." John leaned over and pulled her into a hug. "I don't need a picture to remember it," he said, "but I'll treasure this forever." The next morning, they woke to the soft glow of sunlight reflecting off the snow. Mia raced downstairs to find the tree surrounded by brightly wrapped presents. She gasped, her eyes wide. "John, look at all of this." He chuckled, watching her excitement. "I think Santa must have thought you were extra good this year." Mia dove into the pile, her laughter filling the room as she opened each gift. Art supplies, books, a new camera, and even a pair of ice skates. When the last box was opened, she turned to John, her arms full of presents. "This is the best Christmas ever," she said. John smiled, his heart full. "It's just the beginning, Mia. There are so many more to come." That evening, as they sat by the fire, Mia pulled out their journal. She handed it to John. "Your turn," she said. John took the pen and thought for a moment before writing. "This Christmas, I realized something. It's not the decorations, the gifts, or even the snow that makes the season special. It's having someone to share it with. Mia has given me the greatest gift of all, a family." He handed the journal back to Mia, who read his words carefully before adding her own. "I never thought I'd have a family again, but now I know I do. This is my home, and John is my family. And I think my mom would be happy, because I am." As the fire crackled softly and the snow fell outside, John and Mia sat together, the warmth of the moment wrapping around them like a blanket. It wasn't just a happy ending. It was the start of a beautiful new chapter, filled with love, laughter, and the promise of a bright future together. The years that followed were a testament to the power of love, trust, and the bond that John and Mia had built together. The house, once a quiet and sterile mansion, transformed into a vibrant, lived-in home. Every room bore evidence of their journey: a framed Polaroid of their snowman by the fireplace, a mural Mia had painted on one of the living room walls, and their shared journal sitting proudly on the bookshelf, filled with years of memories. Mia thrived in ways John could never have imagined. Her talent for art blossomed, and by the time she was a teenager, her sketches had evolved into intricate, breathtaking works of creativity. Her studio became her sanctuary, a place where she could dream, create, and express everything she couldn't put into words. For John, watching Mia grow was the most rewarding experience of his life. He continued to run his business, but his priorities shifted. Work was no longer the defining feature of his life. Instead, he found joy in the simple, everyday moments: cheering Mia on at her school art exhibits, cooking her favorite meals, and sharing quiet evenings on the porch, talking about their dreams for the future. One crisp spring morning, Mia stood in the garden, camera in hand, capturing the first blooms of the season. She was 17 now, her auburn curls tied back in a loose braid, her green eyes sparkling with the same curiosity she'd had as a child. John watched her from the porch, a mug of coffee in his hand, marveling at how much she had grown. "Got a good one?" he called out. Mia turned, grinning. "I think so. Want to see?" He walked over as she held up the Polaroid. The photo showed a delicate flower, its petals glistening with dew. But what struck John the most was the way Mia had captured the light. It seemed to glow, radiating warmth and life. "You've got quite an eye," John said, pride evident in his voice. "That's beautiful." Mia shrugged, though her smile widened. "I learned from the best." John chuckled. "Oh, really? I don't remember teaching you anything about photography." "You taught me how to see things," Mia said. "How to look for the beauty in the small stuff." Her words hit John deeply, and he realized yet again how much Mia had grown. Not just in her talents, but in her heart and perspective. "You know," he said, "you've taught me a lot too." Mia tilted her head, curious. "Like what?" "Like how to live in the moment," John replied. "And how to be brave." Mia laughed softly. "I guess we're a good team, then." "The best," John said, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. That evening, they sat together in the living room, flipping through old photos. The gallery Mia had started when she first arrived was now filled with years of memories. Vacations they'd taken, holidays they'd celebrated, and candid moments of laughter and love. Mia paused on one photo of them at the cabin, standing in front of the lake. She was younger then, maybe 10 or 11, her arms wrapped around John's waist. "Do you remember this?" she asked. "Of course," John said. "That was the first time you said you felt like the cabin was home." Mia nodded, her gaze lingering on the photo. "I think that was the first time I realized I wasn't alone anymore." "You never were," John said quietly. "And you never will be." Mia leaned against him, her head resting on his shoulder. "Thanks for choosing me." John felt his throat tighten. "It wasn't a choice, Mia. You were always meant to be part of my life." Years later, Mia stood on a stage in front of a packed auditorium. She was in her early 20s now, her confidence radiating as she accepted an award for her latest art exhibit. Her work, a blend of photography and painting, had gained national recognition for its emotional depth and vivid storytelling. John sat in the audience, his heart swelling with pride. As Mia thanked her mentors, colleagues, and supporters, her voice faltered for a moment. Then she looked directly at John, her eyes shining. And finally, she said, "I want to thank the person who taught me what it means to have a home, a family, and a future. John Harper, you believed in me when I couldn't believe in myself. This is for you." The applause was thunderous, but John barely heard it. He was too busy wiping the tears from his eyes, overcome with the realization of how far they had come. After the ceremony, Mia found John in the lobby, the award clutched tightly in her hands. She threw her arms around him, and for a moment, they stood silently, letting the moment sink in. You've done so much, Mia, John said, his voice filled with emotion. You've made me so proud. I couldn't have done it without you, she replied. John shook his head. You've always had it in you. I just helped you see it. Mia smiled, her eyes glistening. Well, you're stuck with me now. Forever. Forever sounds just about right, John said, pulling her into another hug. Back at the house that evening, they added one final entry to their journal. John wrote, Watching Mia today, I felt the same thing I felt every day since she came into my life. Gratitude. She's not just my family. She's my greatest joy, my greatest teacher, and my greatest adventure. I'm lucky to call her my daughter. Mia took the pen and added her own words. John Harper isn't just my family. He's my hero. He gave me a home, a future, and a belief in myself that I never thought possible. I'll carry his love with me wherever I go. As they closed the journal and placed it back on the shelf, the house settled into a comfortable quiet. Outside, the stars shone brightly, and the world felt full of promise. For John and Mia, their story wasn't just a happy ending. It was a testament to the life they had built together, a life filled with love, resilience, and the unbreakable bond of family. And as they sat together that night, they knew their journey was far from over. It was only just beginning.